I woke up to beeping, blinking lights and a ceiling I did not recognize. For a few seconds, I could not tell if I was alive or hovering somewhere between here and gone. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, my chest burning as if every breath had to fight its way out of a cage. When I tried to sit up, a sharp tug yanked at my arm and pain shot through me. The IV line stretched monitor spiked, and a nurse rushed into view calling out for me to stay still. Her voice tried to sound calm, but I could hear panic tucked beneath the softness. "Easy, honey, easy," she whispered, placing a steady hand on my shoulder as though she was afraid I might bolt from the bed. Another nurse appeared on the opposite side, glancing at the monitors, adjusting something near my left arm. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, and my eyes struggled to focus. The air smelled sterile, like bleach and cold metal, and there was a faint hum under everything, like the world itself was vibrating. My throat felt shredded when I tried to speak, as if I had swallowed gravel, and when I forced out a sound it was barely more than a rasp. "No," I croaked, my voice breaking. "No one is safe when he decides you need to learn a lesson." The first nurse froze her hand, still resting lightly on me. The second nurse's eyes widened, and I felt their hesitation thickening the room. My chest tightened again, panic rising, and instinctively my hand reached my neck. The skin there throbbed when I touched it, and the moment my fingers brushed my throat, I gasped, remembering. Not remembering with clarity, but like being hit with a freight train of sensation and sound. I traced the marks without looking, yet feeling the tender, swollen ridges, oval-shaped bruises, deep and angry. Fingers. His fingers. My pulse monitor spiked violently, and the nurse gently lowered my hand, whispering that I was safe. But the word felt foreign, like a language I had never learned. Safe did not exist in my world. Safe was something other people got to say. I blinked hard, and suddenly the white ceiling dissolved, replaced by the yellow kitchen light at home flickering above me. A fist slamming the table like a gunshot, the sound of glass shattering. Hands gripping my throat, fingers digging in as I kicked not out of rebellion, but pure instinct to survive. My vision blurring the room, warping. The noise of my heartbeat drowning everything thudding inside my skull like a drum. And there was laughing. Not deep adult laughter, but sharp teenage laughter, gleeful and cruel. Luke. My stepbrother holding his phone angled perfectly to catch my humiliation like he always did. God. Claire, this is gold. I swear film's still rolling while I clawed helplessly at the arms, choking the life from me. My mother stood inches away, hands over her mouth, frozen like a statue of fear. She did not scream. She did not run. She simply stared, trembling, trapped by the same terror that had kept her silent for years. Then everything went dark, and I thought that was the end. Now the harsh white lights returned, and a tear slid sideways across my temple into my hairline. The nurse lifted a small pin light and checked my pupils. "Honey," she murmured, "someone hurt you. You can tell us." But I shook my head because for so long speaking only made things worse. I tried again to speak, my throat throbbing like every word scraped over raw flesh. My voice barely held shape. "If I go back," I whispered, "I will not wake up next time." The second nurse stepped closer. Concern etched across her face. The curtain rustled, and I tensed, breath catching. A male voice spoke from outside, low and professional, likely another staff member, but my body reacted as though it were him at the door. My vision tunneled for a second, and my pulse hammered so fast the machine sounded frantic. The nurse pressed her palm over my hand gently, but with firmness, grounding me. "Stay with me. You are here. You are breathing. Nobody is going to hurt you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted those words to be true. But the truth was lodged deep in my bones like splinters. People like him do not stop. They do not calm down and rethink. They do not decide to become better men after a good night's sleep. They escalate. They tighten their grip. They destroy whatever they think they own. And in his world, I was property. His to discipline. His to break. My breath shook so violently the nurse looked afraid I might pass out again. The room suddenly felt colder, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with the memory of bourbon on his breath, thick and sour. I swallowed and the pain tore down my throat like fire. I managed one more word, barely audible. Home. It sounded cracked, like a piece of something shattered beyond repair. The nurse's face softened as she realized what I meant. I was not asking to return. I was begging not to be sent back. A tear slipped into my ear again, and every part of me trembled. The pulse monitor steadied only slightly, but a small change happened in my chest, one I could feel even through the fear. For the first time in years, a breath came not from obedience or fear, but from something else. Resolve. I knew then that if I left this hospital and returned to that house, I would not survive another night. I had walked out of that place alive for the last time. I would not go back. I did not know how I would fight yet. I did not know where I would go or who would believe me. But silence had nearly killed me, and I would not let it finish the job. This time, I would speak. This time, I would survive. I was not born into fear. I learned it slowly, the way a frog learns boiling water by sitting still until the heat becomes unbearable. My earliest memories are warm ones, my father laughing while he lifted me off the ground near our tiny Alabama porch, the smell of red clay and pine trees. After rain, my mother humming old country songs while stirring cornbread batter in a chipped blue ceramic bowl. We were not wealthy, not even close, but we were a family, and I never once thought safety was something a person could lose. My dad worked the coal mines because in our town, men worked with their hands, or they didn't work at all. He came home tired, shoulders stiff, fingernails stained black, no matter how hard he scrubbed, but he still scooped me into his lap and rubbed his rough thumb over the back of my hand while telling me stories about stars and strength and the good that grows quietly in people. Then, one Tuesday morning, the mine sirens wailed through the valley, and everything changed. I was 7. My mother collapsed on the kitchen floor when the superintendent arrived, and I remember watching her hands shake so violently she dropped the glass of sweet tea she was holding. The funeral smelled like carnations and dust. I kept waiting for my father to walk in and say it was all a terrible mistake, but his boots stayed empty by the door, and his jacket hung untouched on the peg like a ghost waiting to be noticed. After that, the house stopped being a home and became something hollow. My mother moved through rooms like she was underwater. Bills stacked up like bricks, foreclosure letters came in envelopes she hid in drawers, and she started crying in the shower so I would not hear, even though I still did. I learned what quiet desperation looks like in the curve of her spine, and the way she stared at empty coffee mugs like they might tell her what to do. When Frank arrived, he did not come like a storm. He came like a solution. A widower from 2 counties over, former corrections officer, deep voice full of Southern certainty, and patriot words that sounded noble until you heard what he really meant underneath. He brought casseroles, repaired leaking pipes, paid a utility bill without being asked, and shook every hand at church with the confidence of a man who believed God endorsed him personally. People whispered that my mother was lucky, blessed even to have found a protector. I remember liking him at first, or maybe just liking the idea of relief. He told me I reminded him of a bookish girl in his family, someone who grew up strong. I did not know how to see danger yet. My mother married him 6 months after meeting him, the quickest whirlwind this town had ever gossiped about. But grief makes you grab onto anything that looks steady. And then the shift began. Quiet at first. A comment about how women should be grateful for a man who provides. A joke about my dad being soft because he used kindness over force. That one made my stomach twist, but I laughed nervously like I was supposed to. Then came control disguised as care. Claire does not need her own phone. Kids don't need privacy, they need discipline. I can handle the bank stuff, it stresses you too much, sweetie. Elaine, you don't have to go back to work. I will take care of everything, just like a real man does. My mother nodded each time, relief softening her face because she thought she had been rescued from drowning. She did not realize she had been handed a different kind of water. Around that time, Luke came into our lives older than me by 3 years, tall and smug, with a smirk that never reached his eyes. He had Frank's eyes, though. Hard, assessing, cold when they wanted to be. At first, he acted bored by us, but soon he discovered something that thrilled him: power trickles down. When Frank raised his voice at my mother for overcooking dinner, Luke snickered at me and kicked my chair leg. When Frank told my mother she would be nothing without him, Luke whispered to me that I should be grateful too. My mother shrank in tiny increments so slowly that I only noticed when one day she flinched at the sound of a car door outside. I remember touching her sleeve, and she forced a smile that did not touch her eyes. "We are okay, baby," she whispered, but her voice wobbled like she did not believe it. Frank started calling me girl instead of Claire. "Girl, get the laundry. Girl, wipe those counters properly. Girl, why do you stand with your shoulders like that? Nobody wants a weak woman." In church, he prayed loudly about family values and discipline, gripping my shoulder so tight his fingers dug into the bone. People smiled at us, thinking they saw strength when really they were seeing possession. My mother reassured me when she could. "He is a good man, baby. He just has high standards. He saved us. Without him, we would have lost everything." She said it like a prayer, or like a debt. When I turned 12, Frank said I was old enough to do all household chores because it builds character. Luke got a dirt bike, I got a mop and a timer. If I took too long, he snapped his fingers and told me I needed to earn my keep. When I earned a small prize at school for a writing contest, $50, and a certificate that made my heart light up, he ripped the envelope open, pocketed the cash, and told me nobody pays girls for silly feelings on paper. Tears stung my eyes, but I said nothing because silence was already teaching me how to survive. My mother tried just once to raise her voice. "Claire worked hard for that money. Frank just let her keep it." He turned so fast a glass fell off the counter and shattered. He did not hit her that day, but he slammed his fist against the wall next to her head and asked who paid for that roof over us. She apologized, and from that moment on, she apologized for breathing around him. My world shrunk. I stopped inviting friends over. I kept my voice soft. I moved quietly. The house became a military base disguised as a family home, and every step I took was measured in caution. I learned that freedom can be stolen not all at once, but piece by piece until you wake up one morning and realize you have not been yourself in years. I remember standing in the doorway of my tiny bedroom one night, holding the small wooden box that still contained my dad's old pocket knife and faded family photo and feeling like I was losing him all over again. I whispered to myself I disappeared while still alive. I did not know then that I would one day claw my way back. I only knew that childhood had ended not when my father died, but when a man who claimed to protect us quietly built a cage and called it love. By the time I turned 13, the quiet erosion of my life had become a full collapse. I used to think abuse was loud, violent, explosive, but the truth is, it starts quietly like a house settling after a storm. Tiny cracks you ignore because you are grateful the walls still stand at all. It was around then that Frank decided childhood was a privilege I no longer deserved. He announced at dinner one night that I was old enough to contribute properly, his voice thick with false righteousness, his fingers drumming on the table like a warden calling roll. "You want food, roof safety, earn it." Safety! The word tasted sour even then. He handed me a chore list so long it looked like a military schedule. Floors every morning, laundry every afternoon, dinner prep, dishes, bathroom scrubbing every other day, dusting every room, weekly yard work. And that was before schoolwork. Luke, meanwhile, lounged on the couch with greasy pizza fingers, video games blaring not a care in the world. "Boys work in the world. Girls keep the world running," Frank said like it was scripture, and my mother nodded like she was praying not to disappear. I started waking before dawn to complete chores before school hands raw from bleach and cheap dish soap, my fingers cracked from constant scrubbing. My classmates thought I had taken up cleaning as a job to help my family, which would have been noble. I did not correct them. The truth felt shameful, and I did not yet understand that shame belonged to the abuser, not the abused. Frank took my phone around that time too, claiming it distracted me from my duties. A girl does not need a phone, only guidance. He said it like he was doing me a favor. He smashed my alarm clock when I overslept one morning and replaced it with a rule wake-up without one. My body learned to rise in the dark like a soldier conditioned to fear punishment. My mother watched from the doorway that day, eyes hollow mouth, trembling like she wanted to speak, but fear sealed her voice inside her ribs. When I got sick with the flu fever burning through me, he told me to toughen up and scrub the kitchen floor because real life does not pause for weakness. I cleaned on my hands and knees until my vision swam and my body shook so violently I vomited. Luke filmed me dry heaving into the sink and laughed so hard tears ran down his face. He captioned the video for his friends' Wednesday chores, and they laughed too. That was the year he started recording me regularly. Whenever I was exhausted crying silently in the pantry while wiping down shelves or struggling to carry baskets of laundry twice my size, he would appear with his phone smirking like he was filming some twisted reality show. Look at her. Extra mouth. House pet. He said it like a joke, but he said it every day until it stopped being a joke and became my identity. Even at school, it followed me spreading like wildfire through whispers and group chats. Girls in the hallway covered their mouths when I walked by. Boys joked about adopting me as a maid. I kept my head down. I learned the art of invisibility because attention meant pain. Frank reinforced this lesson with precision. If the laundry was a minute late, he would flip the basket and make me fold everything again. If dust clung to one windowsill, he would slam his fist on the frame and tell me uselessness was a female disease. My mother once whispered that he did the same thing to her when she forgot to thaw meat for dinner. She showed me a bruise on her hip the shape of a doorknob and told me to pretend I did not see. We survive by being small, but shrinking did not protect me. Nothing did. On my 14th birthday, I woke to Frank dumping a stack of bills beside my bed. Cost of raising you. You better make yourself worth it. Then he took the necklace my father had given me when I was small, a simple silver chain with a tiny star charm. He said sentimental things are a distraction and charity is dangerous. I cried silently into my pillow that night, clutching my chest where the necklace used to rest. My mother passed my door, paused, then walked away without knocking. I do not think she could bear to face the ruins she helped maintain. Frank controlled every dollar that entered the house. If I earned money from babysitting or winning a writing contest at school, he took it. A girl cannot be trusted with finances, he reminded me. That line echoed in my ears every time I reached for my school bag and felt the absence of independence. When I asked to join the school debate club, he laughed loud and long as though ambition was a sin. Girls do not need opinions, they need obedience. He forbade me from learning to drive because driving leads to running. It was the first time he implied ownership outright. My mother stared at her lap when I pleaded with her. Please, I begged. I just want to go somewhere without fear. She touched my cheek, eyes watering, but her voice came out weak. We need him. Without him, we lose everything. I wanted to scream that we had already lost everything except the roof he claimed gave him the right to break us, but I swallowed the words. Because in that house, hope was dangerous. Frank reinforced dominance in small moments, too. If he entered a room, I had to stand. If he sat, I had to offer water or coffee. If he spoke, I had to answer immediately. He inspected my posture, my tone, even how I breathed. He policed silence as much as speech. Luke mirrored him like a loyal apprentice. He learned that cruelty wins favor. He mocked my clothes, my hair, my breath, my footsteps. He filmed me folding laundry, zooming in on my trembling fingers, and whispered worthless in the soundtrack. He once dumped a plate of food in front of me and filmed me cleaning the mess while saying, "Eat like a dog, Claire." Frank laughed. I did not. That same year, I overheard Frank telling a relative that disciplining me was a duty, that he was shaping me into something respectable. I realized then abuse can hide inside patriotism, religion, masculinity, pride. It wears the mask most admired in public. It preaches strength while practicing domination. It uses love as a leash. I still went to school every day, but my spirit stayed at home under lock and key. Teachers asked why I always looked tired. I blamed homework. No one thought to ask why my hands were cracked and raw, or why I flinched when someone shut a locker too loud. Once in gym class, a volleyball hit my arm where an old bruise sat, and I gasped. My friend reached to help, but I pulled back so fast she stared at me like she had seen a ghost. I was a ghost. A girl floating through hallways, breathing borrowed air, waiting for permission to exist. When I won a statewide poetry contest, something inside me flickered. It felt like a candle struggling to stay lit in a storm. I was invited to a banquet to receive the award, but Frank tore the letter into pieces and threw them in my face. Poetry is weakness. Work is loyalty. He kept the prize money. That night, I sat in the dark and whispered lines from my poem, letting each word land like a heartbeat I was afraid to lose. I did not know it yet, but that flicker would become the fire I needed later. It was also around this time my mother broke what remained of my childhood with one sentence. Frank stood in the doorway, arms crossed, waiting while she looked at me with eyes full of exhaustion. "Claire, do not fight him. He knows what is best." My mother said that, the woman who once told me I could be anything if I tried hard enough. Her voice trembled like she hated the words even as she said them, but she said them anyway. And that was the moment I understood she was not just afraid of him. She believed him. She believed his strength mattered more than my freedom. The betrayal was not sudden. It was slow, like erosion, like water eating rock. But when I realized I was living in a house where survival depended on silence, I made myself disappear. I spoke only when spoken to. I moved like I weighed nothing. I stopped dreaming aloud. And still, it was not enough. Because people like Frank do not want obedience. They want possession. They want to erase you and then mock you for being gone. One night I stood by my bedroom window, staring at the moon, imagining my father up there somewhere, still believing in me. I pressed my fingers against the glass and whispered a promise. I will not be theirs forever. I did not know how I would keep that promise yet, but saying it was the first act of rebellion I had left. Even if my voice barely rose above a breath, it belonged to me, and that meant I had not fully disappeared, no matter how hard he tried to erase me. In that moment, I learned something that would save my life. Later, silence can protect you, but only truth can free you. The first spark of rebellion in me did not roar like fire. It whispered like a breath against the dark, small, and almost invisible, but enough to shift something I thought had died. It happened on a day so ordinary it felt like cruel irony. I was cleaning the hallway closet, sorting winter coats and broken umbrellas, while Luke lounged on the couch yelling at video games, and Frank barked orders from his recliner like a king on a sagging throne. My mother hovered in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup in slow circles, eyes lowered, even when no one was looking at her. I reached for an old storage box shoved behind a stack of blankets, and it slipped from my fingers, thudding onto the floor hard enough to pop open. Inside lay bits of my childhood, dusty and forgotten, a ribbon from elementary school, a birthday card written in my father's messy handwriting, and beneath it all, a tiny flip phone with a cracked corner. I lifted it as though it were fragile glass thumb gliding over buttons that once felt big in my small hands. My stomach dropped when the screen lit with a faint glow. It still worked. I do not know why that moment hit me like a jolt, but I swear the air shifted around me. The device felt like a relic from a life where love lived freely, where voices meant something. I pressed a button and a tiny recording app opened. I had forgotten it existed. My hand shook as I whispered into the microphone just to see. When I played it back, the sound of my own voice made my heart pound so hard it hurt. Proof. A record. A truth that could not be argued with or gaslit away. A tool that could give weight to the pain I was forced to swallow every day. I tucked the phone into my pocket so fast I almost dropped it, adrenaline flushing through me like heat. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the device hidden beneath my pillow, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was holding something powerful. I could not stop him yet, but I could trap the truth he tried to bury. The next morning, I woke before dawn as usual, but everything felt different. My steps were quiet, not out of fear, but strategy. My heart raced, not with dread, but with purpose. Frank stormed into the kitchen, slamming cabinets, muttering about bills and respect and obedience. My mother flinched. Luke rolled his eyes and shoved cereal into his mouth. And I, with shaky fingers, slipped the phone into my apron pocket and pressed record. His voice filled the tiny speaker, booming, demeaning, righteous in all the wrong ways. My hands trembled as I washed dishes, but my mind felt sharper than it ever had. For the first time, I was not powerless. I was gathering proof. Over the next weeks, I hid the phone under couch cushions behind books in my sock while I scrubbed floors pressing record whenever Frank's voice rose or Luke's taunts turned cruel. My heart stuttered every time I feared discovery, but each recording felt like a thread in a future escape. I hid the phone beneath a loose floorboard in my closet, covering it with a shoebox filled with winter socks. If he searched my room, he would find nothing, but just in case I needed more than one lifeline, I took a small portion of the bus money I was occasionally given for school and bought a second-hand nanny cam from a thrift store pretending it was for a school project. The cashier barely looked at me. My palms sweat the entire walk home, imagining Frank ripping it from my hands if he somehow knew. That night, I hid the tiny camera in a vent overlooking the living room where most shouting happened. Its little red blinking light felt like a heartbeat steady and secret. I also found a cheap USB stick in a drawer of junk and hid it in the toe of one of my winter boots. I tested everything, whispering dates and times, recording Frank's footsteps, Luke's snickering, my mother crying silently over dishwater. Each file felt like a brick in the foundation of a truth no one could deny. But survival required more than evidence. It required invisibility. So I played the part perfectly. I kept my eyes down. I answered yes, sir, when Frank snapped orders. I scrubbed floors until my fingers bled and pretended obedience when inside I was learning the rhythm of defiance. Luke did not notice at first, too entertained by his own cruelty. But I noticed him watching me, more suspicion flickering behind his smirk when he could not provoke a flinch from me anymore. My mother sensed something too. One night, she caught me staring into the vent longer than necessary and her face tightened. "You seem different, Claire," she whispered in the hallway voice, trembling like she feared even a change in my breathing might bring punishment. "Stronger." I forced a shrug. Just tired. If she knew, she might accidentally reveal it in fear. And fear had always belonged to Frank. But now some of it belonged to me, and that was a kind of power. Each secret recording, each whisper saved in the dark fed a quiet fire inside me. A spark that said, "You are not invisible." A whisper that said, "He does not own truth, and he does not own you." I still woke every day to his footsteps, his rage, his rules. I still lived inside a cage built from threats and gaslight and the fragile bones of my mother's hope. But there was a difference now. I was not only enduring, I was documenting, preparing, waiting, watching. I no longer moved like prey. I moved like someone gathering ammunition, quiet but dangerous in patience. I realized then that silence could be a weapon, but only if it was temporary. One day, I told myself the truth will not hide in floorboards and vents. One day, I will not whisper. One day, the world will hear. And on that day, he will not be the one holding power. I will. The night everything snapped did not start with screaming. It began quietly, which somehow made what came after feel even more brutal, like violence prefers silence before it explodes. I had just returned from school, my backpack heavier than usual. Not because of books, but because of one envelope hidden deep inside one thin paper that felt like a lifeline wrapped in flimsy white. I had applied to a nursing program in secret typing essays and filling forms in the school library, praying no one would notice the faint glow of the screen reflected on my face when I stayed late pretending to finish homework. I thought that if I earned a place, if someone outside our house saw potential in me, maybe I would have a future that did not begin and end in Frank's shadow. When I opened the acceptance letter in a bathroom stall earlier that day, my hands shook so badly I thought I might rip the paper just by holding it. I had gotten in. A scholarship. Not full, but enough to breathe enough to imagine a world where I earned my own life. I pressed the page to my chest and felt a warmth there, something like hope rising like dawn. But hope makes noise even when you try to silence it, and I was not as quiet as I thought. Luke must have seen me slip the envelope into my bag at school. He always moved like a snake unnoticed until fangs were already sunk into flesh. He met me in the hallway as I was cleaning my shoes on the mat, his arms crossed, a smirk carved deep into his boyish face, like he had been waiting to enjoy something cruel. "Dad wants to see you," he said, his voice dripping satisfaction. That word "dad" coming from him felt like poison. I forced a steady breath and walked into the living room where Frank sat in his recliner like a judge ready to deliver sentence. He held the envelope in his hand. My stomach dropped and every bone in my body turned to stone. Something shifted in him the moment he saw my face register dread. "So, you thought you could make decisions without me?" His voice was low, almost calm, which made it worse. Luke leaned against the doorway phone, already raised in his hand, like a weapon. I swallowed, but my throat felt sandpaper dry. "It is just a school letter," I whispered, trying to keep my pulse even. Frank stood slowly, deliberately, like a man stretching before a hunt. He lifted the paper and read, mockingly mimicking my voice with exaggerated sweetness. "Congratulations, Claire Morgan. Nursing scholarship, bright future." He paused and looked at me with a sneer. "You think you get to leave. Leaving is privilege. Leaving is earned." His voice deepened. "And you have earned nothing." My mother hovered behind him, her hands twisting a dish towel, face pale and tight, like she already knew what was coming but could not stop the train. Frank shredded the letter into strips, letting the pieces fall like confetti at a funeral. Something inside me cracked then, not loud, but deep, like the first tiny fracture in a dam. "It is my life," I whispered before I could stop myself. My voice was small but real. His eyes sharpened in an instant, a predator catching the first sign of rebellion. "What did you say?" I felt fear slam into my chest, but fear is not always enough to drown truth once it has found air. My voice trembled but did not break. "It is my life," Luke gasped theatrically. Frank stepped forward, his face turning a shade of red I had only seen once before, the night he slammed my mother into a cabinet for disagreeing with him over grocery money. He grabbed my arm so fast I barely saw his hand move. I stumbled forward, hitting the edge of the coffee table, pain radiating through my hip. "You think you get choices?" His grip tightened, fingers digging into muscle. "You think you get freedom?" He yanked me again, and I hit the wall, my skull cracking against drywall. My vision blurred, lights sparking like fireworks in my brain. My mother took one step forward, voice small. "Frank, please." He turned on her, and she froze, retreating without another word. Luke laughed quietly, zooming in on my face as tears stung my eyes. "Come on, sis, smile for the camera," he said. The world tilted as Frank wrapped his hand around my throat. It was not the first time, but it was different. There was no pretense left, no simmering anger masquerading as discipline. This was pure possession. His fingers pressed into my windpipe, squeezing. Warmth flooded my face as blood raced to my skin. My hands clawed at his arm, instinct fighting where courage could not. My mother sobbed, shaking but unmoving, like fear rooted her into the floor. Air disappeared from my lungs. The world shrank to the size of his grip. Black dots appeared in my vision. My knees buckled. Luke giggled like he was watching a prank video. "Dad, this is golden." "She looks like a fish out of water." My chest screamed for breath, but nothing came. I tried to speak, but only a strangled sound escaped. My legs kicked weakly, then not at all. Frank leaned in close breath, heavy with beer and arrogance. "You will not embarrass me with your dreams. You belong here. You obey here." That last word shattered the world around me. Obey, like I was not a daughter or a person, but property. The room vibrated. My pulse pounded so loudly it drowned everything. My fingers went numb. Black crept in like smoke at the edges of my sight. Then, something unexpected. A flicker outside the window. Movement across the yard. Mrs. Jennings, our neighbor, stood frozen on her porch, eyes wide, watering can dangling from her hand. Her face drained of color. For a split second our eyes met, mine pleading, hers horrified. Frank did not see her. Luke was too busy filming, and my mother had collapsed against the fridge, covering her ears like she could shut out the violence by refusing to hear it. That moment, locked in panic and fading consciousness, I saw something break in Mrs. Jennings's face. The watering can fell from her hand, and water splashed across the concrete, loud in the still evening. She stepped forward as if to intervene, but fear held her too. She froze again, torn, witnessing a horror she could no longer pretend was imagination. My lungs convulsed, seeking oxygen that would not come. My vision tunneled into a pinprick. I thought of my father. I thought of the necklace he gave me. I thought of the life I almost had. And then everything went black. When awareness returned, it did not arrive like waking, but like surfacing from underwater without consent. I gasped not because air came, but because panic still clung to me. The room was darker, my cheek pressed to carpet, my body heavy like someone had replaced my bones with concrete. I heard muffled sounds, Luke's video game now blaring again, Frank muttering to himself in the kitchen, the clink of a beer bottle. My throat throbbed in a deep, pulsing ache. My chest felt bruised from the inside as if my lungs had been beaten too. My mother knelt nearby, not touching me, just watching in silent guilt, hands trembling so violently, her wedding ring rattled against itself. She whispered, "I am sorry," but her voice held no movement, no action, only shame. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone, scraped raw and burned. Sweat and tears soaked my face, mixing with carpet fibers and dust. I felt like a corpse, still tethered by breath. Hours passed in blurs. Luke posted something online. Frank paced, boasting about breaking weakness. My mother stared at nothing. I drifted in and out, throat stinging every time I swallowed, body shaking with aftershock. Near midnight, Frank locked the front door and retreated to bed. The house settled into eerie quiet. I lay still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. Every breath hurt anyway, scraping through bruised tissue. The only thing louder than my heartbeat was the ringing in my ears and a single thought repeating like a drum: I almost died and nobody stopped him. Nobody. Except someone did see. Someone stood outside the window and saw the truth. That realization flickered like a match in darkness. If someone outside saw, then the lie no longer belonged only to him. Evidence did not just exist in the secret recordings I had hidden. It now existed in someone else's eyes. I pushed myself up slowly, pain screaming through my neck and ribs. My hands shook as they touched the bruises forming under my jaw. I could feel each fingerprint hot and throbbing, a map of ownership he believed was permanent. I crawled toward my room, limbs, weak breath, shallow. Every inch felt like dragging through thick mud. When I shut my bedroom door behind me, my body collapsed onto the floor. I pressed a pillow into my face to muffle the sob that escaped, a sound ripped from the rawest part of me. Then I lifted my head and whispered, voice barely air, "If I stay silent again, I will die." The words hung in the room, fragile but real, and something inside me, small but fierce, caught fire. I used my last strength to reach under the loose floorboard, fingers trembling as they pulled out the hidden phone. I pressed record. My voice cracked and broke, but it existed. Date, time, what he did, what they saw. My breath trembled, but I said it anyway. I will not disappear. That night, I did not sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling bruises burning like warnings, and waited for morning. For the first time, fear did not paralyze me. It propelled me, because the truth was no longer just mine. It had a witness. And with a witness, survival was no longer a wish. It was a plan. When consciousness returned fully in the emergency room, I did not feel alive so much as delayed in dying. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like an electric storm. My throat burned with every swallow, raw and bruised from where Frank's fingers had closed around it. I could taste dried blood near the back of my tongue, and hospital oxygen felt too clean, too sharp for lungs that had spent years learning to breathe fear instead of air. I could hear murmured voices through the thin curtain walls, feet moving, machines beeping somewhere, a child crying softly. But my world was narrowed to the ache in my neck, and the terror coiled inside my ribs like a living thing that refused to release me. A young ER tech named Daniel hovered near the bed, clipboard in hand, but eyes far more focused on the bruises he was pretending not to stare at. His hair was messy from a long shift, and his scrubs held faint creases from kneeling somewhere recently. He spoke softly, like someone who knew too much about trauma, but also knew the limits of what he could say. We are going to take some scans, check your throat, make sure there is no internal swelling. He glanced at my pulse monitor. You are safe here. That sentence again. I closed my eyes. Safe was a story other people told but did not live. My neck throbbed, my chest strained, my fingers twitched at my sides like they wanted to grip something but could not find anything solid. Daniel wrote something down and then hesitated. Can I ask, did someone do this to you? His voice was quiet, not prying, not judgmental, just gently placed in the air between us like a hand-held-out palm open, waiting. I tried to answer, but the moment I tried to speak, my throat spasmed pain shooting through jaw to ear. My voice cracked like glass. I fell. That lie was muscle memory, survival instinct. The words tasted like rot in my mouth. Daniel nodded slowly, not believing me but not pushing. He started to turn away, then paused again. You know, falls do not usually leave finger marks. His voice was cautious, but the truth still landed like a spotlight in the dark. My breath stuttered. The room seemed to tilt. I pressed my hand over my throat, feeling the raised pattern of bruises like a set of keys he had pressed into my skin, claiming me once more. Tears burned behind my eyelids, hot and humiliating. I did not want to cry in front of anyone. Crying meant weakness, and weakness got punished. But the tears came anyway, silent and shaking as my shoulders trembled under the blanket. Daniel looked down, not out of discomfort, but respect, giving me space to fall apart without witnessing the worst of it. When my breathing slowed, he spoke again. We take strangulation very seriously here. People do not always get a second chance to leave. That sentence pierced something deep inside me. A second chance. He walked away to give me privacy, and I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, each square blurring under a film of tears. My mind replayed Frank's face inches from mine, the pressure of his hand, the world fading, the sound of Luke laughing like entertainment was oxygen for him. My stomach tightened. If I go back, I will not wake up next time. The truth was stark and cold, a blade pressed to my chest from the inside. My mother's face flashed next frozen lips, trembling eyes begging me silently not to fight because she could not endure the fallout. I loved her, but love had become a chain around both our throats, and hers was one she refused to cut. A nurse returned and checked my vitals. She asked if she could call someone for me. I shook my head, voice too broken to trust. I have no one, I whispered hoarsely. It was not entirely true, but it felt true. Then a tiny knock interrupted the sterile rhythm of the room. The curtain opened slightly, and Mrs. Jennings appeared, wrapped in a quilted coat, her gray hair pinned neatly despite the chaos in her expression. She had driven herself to the hospital in the middle of the night. When our eyes met, mine widened in surprise. Hers filled with tears immediately. "Oh, honey," she breathed, voice trembling like something sacred and fragile had been cracked open inside her. "I am so sorry." Her guilt was painted across her face like war paint. She approached slowly, not touching me at first, like afraid she would break me just by existing too close. Her hand finally found mine, warm and trembling. "I saw you," she whispered. I froze. I saw what he did. I should have called sooner. I should have acted. I will not fail you again." Her voice broke on the last word. The dam burst inside me then. I sobbed without sound, body shaking so hard the blankets rustled. Not out of fear this time, out of relief. Someone saw. Someone believed. Someone came. Mrs. Jennings reached up and brushed hair from my face like a mother who remembered how to comfort, and I leaned into her hand because it was the first kind touch I had felt in years. When she finally stepped back, she spoke steadier steel under her grief. "You are not going back there. I will help you. We will call who we need to call. We will get you safe." I had never heard safety spoken like a promise before. Nurses began arranging paperwork. Daniel returned with a folder. Someone mentioned social services. Someone else mentioned police. The walls seemed to close in again at the sound of that word. Police. If they got involved, everything would come crashing down. Frank would rage. Luke would spit venom. Mother would fold into herself like paper under flame. But if they did not get involved, I would be dead. Choice disguised as fear. I slid my legs off the bed. The cold floor shocked my feet. "Where are your shoes?" Daniel asked. I didn't answer. I pulled the blanket around my shoulder's throat, aching with every swallow, and stood. Mrs. Jennings tried to steady me gentle but firm. "We will go together." I shook my head. "I have to do something first." My voice cracked, barely voice at all. She looked confused, but then understanding dawned. The evidence. I had to retrieve the recordings before Frank found them. They were my lifeline now, my proof. Without them, this was just another story men like him could twist and bury. I walked slowly through the sliding hospital doors into the cold night, wrapped in a hospital blanket, wearing only socks and a gown beneath breathing air that tasted like freezing dawn and desperation. Mrs. Jennings hurried beside me. The stars overhead flickered like tiny sparks, and each inhale burned my throat, but I kept moving. I did not look back at the hospital or the safety it promised. I walked toward danger because turning back meant surrender, and surrender meant death. Leaving was not escape yet. Leaving was the decision to live, and decisions are only real when we act on them. I whispered into the night air, voice shaking like a prayer, "I am not going back." And for the first time, I believed myself. The cold night air felt like it was slicing into my skin as I stepped out of the hospital wrapped in nothing but a thin gown and a scratchy blanket, feet numb in socks breath visible in short bursts. Each inhale scraped my throat like sandpaper, each exhale trembled with equal parts terror and determination. Streetlights glowed through mist like watchful eyes, and every distant sound made me flinch, even though each second that passed away from that house felt like borrowed time I needed to spend wisely before it ran out. Mrs. Jennings hurried to catch up breath fogging as she tried to convince me to get into her car, but I shook my head, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. If I drove up in a car, if headlights flashed through those windows, Frank would wake Luke, would hear, and everything I had hidden would be destroyed by morning. I needed stealth more than comfort. I whispered, voice scraping low, "I have to get the evidence," and she understood immediately, her face tightening with dread. She pulled off her coat and draped it over my shoulders, then wrapped my trembling hands with her scarf. "At least take this," she murmured. I nodded, unable to speak more without feeling my resolve crack. Every step toward the house felt like walking back into the mouth of a beast I had just escaped. But proof was the only weapon I had left, and I needed it before daylight. The neighborhood was silent as we walked street by street, keeping to shadows, breath frozen in the air like ghosts trailing behind us. My body ached with every step, ribs sore, legs, weak throat pulsing under bruised fingerprints, but I forced movement because stillness meant death. I felt like prey, but I moved like someone who refused to die quietly. When the outline of the house appeared through the trees, my legs nearly gave out. My chest tightened in a panic that felt like drowning, but Mrs. Jennings whispered steady reassurance beside me. "I am right here. I am not letting you go alone." We crouched behind the hedges bordering the yard, the house looming silent and black windows reflecting only moonlight. Somewhere inside, Frank slept like a man who believed control was eternal. Luke probably snored on the couch, unaware his entertainment material was about to become evidence. My mother likely lay awake, crying quietly, clinging to a belief that obedience kept us alive, even as it slowly killed us. My throat clenched. For a moment, I wanted to curl up and disappear, to sink into the earth and let the ground swallow me whole. But then I remembered the videos, the recordings, his voice, my choking, Luke's laughter, and the shaking inside me hardened into something sharper. I whispered, "I have to go alone because if he wakes and sees you, he will hurt you too." Mrs. Jennings opened her mouth to argue, but then she nodded slowly. She understood danger the way only someone who had seen it in another's eyes could. She pressed her phone into my hand. "Call if anything happens." I nodded, then crawled along the bushes until I reached the side of the house. Every twig under my foot felt like a gunshot in the silence, and I froze each time listening for footsteps inside. Nothing. My breath spilled in fast, shaky clouds as I slipped to the back porch, the boards creaking so faintly it sounded like bones shifting under weight. I reached under the loose plank just behind the post where I had once hidden a spare key as a child and felt cold metal brush my fingers. The USB. My hand closed around it so tightly my knuckles ached. Proof number 1. Then, heart racing, I crouched and moved toward my bedroom window. It was cracked at the bottom for ventilation, just as I had left it, and I slid my fingers under the sash, lifting slowly. The wood groaned softly, and I froze again, pulse pounding. Still nothing. Inside my room sat in dim moonlight wallpaper, lined with faint childhood flowers that felt mocking now. I slipped through the window, landing quietly on my worn rug. Every shadow looked like him. My skin prickled with fear so strong I tasted metal. The floorboard near my closet hid the old phone. I reached under fingers, brushing cool plastic. Relief nearly turned my knees to water. I clutched it to my chest. 2 pieces of truth. Enough to speak, enough to prove. But I needed the third, the camera card. It was taped inside my winter boot in the hall closet. Getting there required leaving the illusion of safety my room offered, and for a second I froze, breath caught in my bruised throat. Then I heard faint movement above a house settling or pressure on a floorboard. Panic surged, but I forced myself to crawl to my door and listen. Silence. I cracked the door open and slipped into the hallway. The air smelled like stale beer and old carpet. I padded silently to the closet, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I opened the closet door inch by inch, wincing at a faint click in the hinges. My fingers trembled as I reached inside the right boot, feeling for the tape. Then suddenly, a floorboard groaned in the hallway. Not mine, not my weight. Someone else was awake. My lungs froze, heart slamming against my ribs painfully. I could hear footsteps. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Frank's steps had always sounded like judgment. Luke's sounded like mischief. These sounded like hunting. I grabbed the card, ripping it free so fast the tape snapped and shoved it into my bra, just as a shadow moved on the wall. I slid silently into the tiny gap between the coats and the side panel, heart beating loud enough I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps grew closer, slow and measured. Frank. I could tell by the weight and rhythm the confident command in each step. He paused outside the closet. My throat constricted so tight, spots danced behind my eyes. I did not breathe. Not even a tremor. The doorknob shifted, just slightly. Testing. My stomach twisted. He knew someone was up, or maybe he sensed rebellion like predators sense blood. One more breath and he would hear the strain of panic. I bit my tongue, tasted iron, forced my lungs to still. After what felt like hours but was probably seconds, the footsteps continued down the hall. I did not move. I waited 30 heartbeats, then 60. My whole body shook, muscles screaming to run, but fear gluing me in place. When the house fell silent again, I slid out, knees, weak palms slick. I did not close the closet door. I did not risk sound. I glided back down the hall past my room, where safety had just collapsed, and toward the back door. Halfway there, I heard soft laughter from the living room. Luke, awake, watching something on his phone, probably a clip of me gasping for air. Rage sparked hot and instant, a flash of heat under the bruises. But rage could not save me. Stealth could. I reached the back door, hands trembling as I turned the lock slow as breath, pulling it open just enough to slip through. The moment I stepped outside and night air hit my face, my knees nearly buckled with relief and terror mixed. I moved across the yard, each step silent and desperate. When I reached the edge of the fence, Mrs. Jennings burst from the shadows, arms outstretched like she had been bracing to catch me if I fell. I collapsed into her for half a second before straightening, every nerve still buzzing with fear. "Got it," I whispered hoarsely, holding up the USB like a shard of salvation. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and guided me toward her car as fast as she dared without making noise. My body shook uncontrollably, but my grip on the phone and USB tightened until my knuckles whitened. As we reached the passenger door, a porch light flicked on next door. A dog barked somewhere. My heart exploded in panic, but Mrs. Jennings placed her hand on my back, steadying me. "You did it," she breathed. "You are getting out." For the first time in my life, the night did not feel like a threat. It felt like cover, like a shield. I looked back once. The house stood still and dark, unaware that its ownership over me had fractured. I felt bruises pulse, throat ache, ribs throb, but inside me something stronger beat. Not fear, not obedience. Truth. And truth, once carried out of darkness, does not go back willingly. I slid into the car, curled around the evidence like a newborn flame, and whispered to myself, voice raw but real. This time, I am not the one hiding. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and old paper, that sterile kind of justice air that feels too clean for the kind of dirt people drag into it. And as I walked through the double glass doors, my knees almost buckled, because for years I had imagined this moment only in whispers, in prayers, whispered beneath blankets in the dark, in breaths I did not know I was holding, and now it was real beneath fluorescent lights, and the heavy gaze of strangers real in the soft brush of Daniel's sleeve against mine, as he walked beside me, real in my mother's trembling steps behind us, her hands knotted tightly in front of her like she was holding her own guilt together so it would not spill all over the marble floor. My ribs ached with every inhale, a ghost of his hands still bruised into my bones. But there was no room for weakness here, not when I could feel Frank's presence, even before I saw him, that cold vibration of a predator in the room. When the bailiff opened the courtroom door and I stepped inside, the air shifted like every eye was a silent witness waiting to see if the story they had been told was real or exaggerated or imagined, like abusers love to claim. And then I saw him sitting at the defense table in a stiff suit, a smirk carved into his face like a scar. Frank did not look afraid. He looked angry that someone had dared drag him into a world where his voice was not the only one, where fists did not automatically equal truth. Luke sat behind him, pale knees, bouncing eyes, darting around the room, like a boy suddenly realizing the monster he worshipped could not protect him here. My mother hesitated near the aisle, her breath shaking, then slowly took a seat behind me, like she was torn between wanting to stand by me and wanting to disappear. Her eyes red and swollen from nights of regret she was too late to voice. Mrs. Jennings sat on the opposite aisle, back straight, jaw set, the picture of unshakable resolve that had taken her years of quiet witnessing to find. When the judge entered, everyone rose, and the sound of chairs scraping against the polished floor reminded me of boots advancing in the living room, the sound that always made my heart race. But today, the fear trembled beneath something new, something sharp and rising like breath after drowning. The prosecutor began, her voice calm, but edged like steel as she laid out the charges: domestic violence, coercive control, unlawful restraint, attempted strangulation. I heard the words, but it was my memories answering each one. Flashes of nights freezing me in place, the roar of his voice calling me worthless, the look in Luke's eyes as he filmed. Frank leaned back like the room bored him, his jaw twitching only slightly, his arrogance wrapping around him like armor. But arrogance does not shield against truth, not when truth has teeth. The prosecutor called me to the stand, and the moment I sat in that witness chair, the air seemed to thicken, my pulse hammering in my throat. The oath felt heavy, like every syllable was a brick I was placing between myself and the silence that once kept me alive but nearly killed me. When she asked me to speak, my voice nearly cracked. But then I remembered lying on that cold rug gasping for air, remembered Luke laughing, remembered my mother frozen by fear, and suddenly the room faded and only the truth existed. I spoke, soft at first, then stronger, describing the first time he told me obedience was love, the night he took my phone and called it discipline the way Luke learned laughter as a weapon, the bruise on my mother's wrist that changed her into someone I could not save until she chose to save herself. I told them about the night I woke up in the hospital, the moment I decided I would not die in silence, the footage I would bring here like blood-stained proof. Some jurors shifted, some blinked too fast, but all listened. When I described the moment his hands closed around my throat, a woman in the jury pressed her palm to her chest and another clenched his jaw, like he had once failed someone the way my mother had failed me. Frank rolled his shoulders, muttering under his breath. A predator testing the strength of bars he could finally feel around him. Then the prosecutor asked the question that felt like slicing open my ribs all over again. Why did you not leave sooner? The defense attorney leaned forward like he was waiting for me to crumble, like shame would choke me the way Frank's hands had. But I stared straight at the jury and answered the way survivors answer when they are done apologizing for living through hell. Because leaving does not feel like freedom when someone convinces you the world will crush you harder than they do. Because fear is a house, and I grew up inside it. Because sometimes survival looks like staying alive long enough to collect proof. And in that moment, the courtroom did not feel cold anymore. It felt like every heartbeat in that room softened and tightened at the same time. My voice did not shake after that. His power was shrinking. I could see it in the twitch of his fingers, in the tight line of Luke's mouth, in the way my mother covered her lips to stop from sobbing. When the prosecutor asked for the recordings to be played, my hands tightened on the wooden railing like it was an anchor, keeping me from floating away into panic. And the judge gave a small nod, his expression a neutral mask, but his eyes sharp like he already expected the truth would hurt to hear. The first audio clip filled the courtroom, Frank's voice booming from the speakers, slurred and venomous shouting about respect and obedience, every syllable dipped in the same rage that once kept me silent. A juror flinched when his fist thudded against furniture in the recording, the sound loud and violent, even through speakers, and I watched Frank stiffen, jaw clenching his mask, slipping as the room heard him without his spin, without his charm, without the intimidation he once wielded like a weapon. Then came Luke's laughter layered over my gasps, and I saw his face drain of color, his shoulders trembling, his eyes avoiding the screen as if refusal could erase the proof. A woman in the gallery wiped tears while a man clenched his fists and stared at Frank like he could not fathom a human being doing that to a child. My mother buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, guilt pouring out of her like a dam had cracked. I could hear her breath hitch each time my strained pleas echoed across the courtroom, and for a moment, anger flared in me like a match struck in the dark because she had heard those sounds before and done nothing, and yet seeing her break now here somehow hurt too. Then the video came on, the one Luke thought was hilarious when he recorded it, and the entire room went still. My body on the grainy screen crumpled on the carpet, blood staining my cheek and chin, my fingers clawing for air as Frank loomed over me, shadow swallowing my frame. My voice raw and barely there whispering, "Stop," and Luke's gleeful commentary behind it, like cruelty was entertainment, like pain was comedy. Someone in the back gasped softly, and the bailiff shifted as if instinct demanded he protect someone from danger still present. Frank leaned forward, lips curling as if disgusted by being judged, but for the first time I saw a flicker, a crack, something like fear or perhaps shock that the world could finally see him without the armor of privacy. When the video paused, a silence dropped so thick it felt like we were underwater and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then my mother stood abruptly, voice shaking as she begged the judge to understand she had been terrified that she had believed Frank when he told her leaving meant homelessness, that she had failed me because she had lost herself long before she lost her courage. Her confession poured out in broken pieces, every sentence an echo of years she could not rewind, and though her words ached in my chest, I did not interrupt because this moment was hers to face her reckoning with the truth she once chose to ignore. Frank snarled from the table, trying to stand, shouting that she was lying, that he had provided, that he had protected his family, but the bailiffs moved toward him and the judge slammed his gavel, ordering silence, his voice cutting through the chaos with finality. The prosecutor turned back to the jury, her tone steady but cold, asking them to look at the bruises documented in hospital photos displayed beside me, the medical report confirming strangulation trauma, the chain of custody chart Daniel signed the night he treated me. She pointed to my journal entries copied on screens around the room, trembling, handwriting, recording dates and blows and threats, the ink pressed hard enough it dented the back pages. She showed the hidden camera footage, Frank pacing barking orders calling me worthless, Luke chuckling beside him. Each clip etched another wound into the air, each second another piece of who he really was. When it was the defense's turn, they tried to twist survival into blame, implying I provoked, asking why I did not run, why I filmed instead of screaming for help, why I stayed in a house that was killing me. The attorney's voice was smooth but hollow, like someone reciting from a playbook built by men who never understood fear with teeth, and I met his gaze without flinching. Fear. Prison illusion, I said, voice unwavering. You do not know you can leave hell when hell is the only home you have ever been allowed to exist in. Silence again, but this time not suffocating. Heavy. A truth that settled deep in the bones of the room. The defense tried to point to my mother's silence, tried to make her complicity look like contradiction, but the prosecutor shut it down with a soft, deadly fact. Terror chains stronger than steel. And then, as if something inside Frank snapped, he slammed his hands on the table and stood fully shouting that I belonged to him, that I had no right to humiliate him, that I was his responsibility, and his to discipline each word, sinking him further with every arrogant syllable. The judge's face hardened like granite, while the bailiffs surged forward, gripping his arms as he fought them. Spit flying as he cursed me. Cursed the court, cursed the country that dared judge him. For the first time, Luke cried, not angry tears, but terrified ones, body shaking like a boy, realizing monsters cannot always outrun consequences. And I sat there breathing slow and steady, watching a kingdom built on fear crumble into dust without raising my voice, without lifting a hand. Truth was louder than he ever was, and he knew it now. The judge ordered a recess after Frank's outburst, perhaps to let the room breathe, or maybe to allow the gravity of his unraveling to settle into the walls like a stain no one could scrub out. And while bailiffs dragged him out, still muttering curses, still thrashing, like a man convinced authority belonged only to him, I sat perfectly still, fingers pressed against my knees, feeling the tremor of adrenaline slowly ebb into something else, something like exhausted relief and dawning power. The jury filed out silent and pale, like witnesses who had not expected to see the truth, so raw, so unfiltered, and Luke sank forward in his chair, face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking, not with arrogance, but with fear, the kind that finally recognizes consequences. My mother reached for me, fingers brushing my sleeve like she was asking permission to exist beside me again. And I did not pull away, but I did not fold into her either. This moment belonged to the girl who crawled across the carpet gasping for breath, to the girl who hid recorders like lifelines, to the girl who walked out of an emergency room in a paper gown because she would rather freeze in the Alabama night than die quietly in a house that never protected her. When court resumed, the prosecutor called Daniel to the stand, his voice steady as he described the injuries, the marks around my neck consistent with strangulation, the bruised ribs, the elevated stress labs, the way my voice broke when he asked if someone hurt me. He testified like someone who understood the difference between a broken bone and a broken spirit, and his calm, steady presence felt like a small anchor in a storm that had lasted years. Then Mrs. Jennings took the stand, hands folded, shoulders straight, like the soldier she once was. Voice unwavering as she admitted the guilt she carried for too long, the nights she heard something but told herself it was not her place, the moment she saw me collapse through her kitchen window and promised God herself that she would never be silent again. Her eyes found mine for a second, and in that silent exchange I felt something I never experienced in that house. An adult choosing to stand to witness to protect. When she handed over the flash drive she had brought to police, the courtroom was so still the hum of the overhead lights felt loud. The prosecutor asked the final question, soft but devastating. If you had not intervened, what do you believe would have happened to Claire? Mrs. Jennings did not blink. He would have killed her. And suddenly, every breath in the room felt like a held note. When the judge dismissed her, she passed my mother in the aisle, and instead of hostility, there was something like shared grief. Two women who had loved me in different ways and failed in different ways, but who now faced truth together. The defense had grown quiet by then, their strategy shattered, not by law, but by reality too undeniable to spin, and when closing arguments came, the prosecutor did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She simply stated that no child should survive more than the law is willing to punish, that a home is not a home, when fear sleeps in every corner, that evidence does not lie, even when abusers do. The jury returned faster than anyone expected, and when they filed in, heads held firm, I felt my lungs tighten, felt the weight of every bruise I ever hid, every silent dinner where my mother's hands trembled, every school hallway where Luke's friends whispered extra mouth like it was my name. The foreman stood voice steady as stone and spoke the word I had dreamed of but feared I would never hear: guilty. Then another guilty, and another, and another. Every count, every charge a nail, sealing a door behind the man who once dictated the air I breathed. Frank lunged when he heard the verdict muscles straining, spit flying as he screamed that the world had gone soft, that girls like me ruined families, that obedience was respect, that his life was being stolen. But no one listened to him now. The gavel slammed chains clinked as they tightened around his wrists, and his legs buckled, like the ground finally gave up holding the weight of what he was. Luke, face blotchy, whispered, "I did not know it was that bad," and I turned my head just enough for him to see the truth in my eyes, the truth that children who laugh at scars do not get to pretend innocence when the room fills with proof, and he broke, crying like a child who realized cruelty is not a shield but a stain. When the judge ordered him to juvenile rehabilitation, his sobbing filled the air with a sound I once envied but now pitied. My mother whispered my name, not as apology this time, but as a plea for a bridge back to me, and I let her take my hand, not because pain erases easily, but because healing is not vengeance, and I refused to inherit Frank's rage. When we stepped out of the courthouse and sunlight touched my face, it did not feel like an ending, but like the first real breath I ever took. Reporters murmured, neighbors stared with widened eyes, and someone whispered, "There she is, the girl who survived him." I did not correct them. Surviving him was not shame. It was proof. I looked at the sky, bright and clean, nothing like the dim living room where I once begged for breath, and I thought of the night I whispered into a hidden phone, not knowing if hope was a story I had invented to stay alive. Now, hope stood solid beneath my feet, hard as courthouse stone. Freedom did not feel like victory. It felt like permission to exist, and as I walked down those steps, I touched the tender bruises still healing on my ribs and promised myself I would never shrink again. Not for a man. Not for silence, not for fear. He took years. I took them back. The truth, when finally spoken, did not just defend me. It untied me. When the courtroom emptied and the frenzy of the verdict settled into a quiet hum, we did not leave immediately, because freedom is not something you sprint into when you have lived your whole life being told you do not deserve it. Instead, I sat in that wooden seat with my palms flat on the smooth surface, breathing like someone learning the rhythm of air again, and the judge remained on the bench reviewing papers, while Frank waited in a holding room behind the door, shackled every breath he exhaled, muffled by glass, and the reality he could no longer outrun. The sentencing hearing came 3 weeks later, though time in those days felt stretched and warped like a rubber band pulled too tight after years of being coiled inside a clenched fist. I spent the days leading up to it waking to silence that did not threaten, to mornings where the only footsteps were my own, to nights where sleep did not feel like surrender but like rest, though sometimes I jolted awake expecting his voice or Luke's snicker and had to remind myself again and again that house is behind you, that life is over. When we returned for sentencing, the same pews filled up again. Some familiar faces, others strangers drawn by whispers of justice finally delivered in a small Alabama town not used to seeing monsters dragged out from living rooms instead of alleys. Frank was brought in through the side door, wrists cuffed, ankles chained, and his eyes did not carry rage this time, but something colder, like a man cataloging every loss and convincing himself he would rise again, even as reality crushed that fantasy beneath institutional lighting. Luke sat further back with his court-appointed counselor, hands folded like a child waiting for punishment, his face gaunt as if the months since trial had drained the bravado straight out of him. My mother sat beside me, hands clasped so tightly I worried her knuckles would split, her anxiety vibrating through the seat, her breath shallow and uneven, but she did not fold into herself this time. She sat upright like someone learning to inhabit a spine again. The judge read through the charges slowly, each count a reminder carved in legal language, and then he looked up, eyes sweeping the room, landing briefly on me before turning to Frank. He spoke not with anger, but with clarity, saying that a home is a sacred space in the American fabric, that fatherhood is not dominion, but duty, that a man who uses strength to cage a child forfeits both authority and mercy in equal measure. He then listed the sentence 24 years for aggravated assault, coercive control, unlawful imprisonment, and attempted strangulation with no possibility of early release for domestic violence under state statute. There was a moment where Frank's face twitched not in rage, but in shock, the kind that strips pride like paint peeled under heat, and he opened his mouth as if to speak. But nothing came out, as if the words died before reaching air, and the silence that followed held more power than any outburst ever could. Luke was ordered into a long-term juvenile rehabilitation program focused on abusive youth intervention. His record sealed, but flagged mandated weekly therapy and barred from contact with me until a psychological board approved otherwise. And when he heard it, his head dropped shoulders, slumping, his breath shaking like someone realizing accountability is not death, but rebirth forced through fire. Then the judge addressed my mother, not with condemnation, but with solemn weight, ordering trauma counseling monitored visitation with me until a therapist certified. She understood her failures not as shame, but as wounds to mend, and she nodded, tears rolling silently, not defensive now, but accepting. When the gavel struck, a soft gasp rippled through the room, and it was as though the sound cracked open something in my chest. Not joy, not grief, but relief so deep it felt ancestral, like generations of women who swallowed terror had exhaled through me. Frank was led away, and this time he did not fight, did not shout, did not look back. He only stared forward, jaw tight, as if refusing to acknowledge the world still existed outside his control. As he disappeared through the holding door, I did not feel triumph, only release, and something gentler too. A quiet dignity in knowing justice had not been mercy, but balance restored. When we stepped outside, camera crews waited, but I did not rush to speak. Instead, I lifted my face to the winter sun and let warmth hit bruises still faint beneath makeup. And in that moment, I understood freedom not as escape, but as presence, as the right to breathe without flinching. My mother reached for my hand again, fragile, hopeful, and I let her hold it lightly, not because forgiveness was instant, but because healing was a road we could walk in opposite lanes without hatred driving the distance between us. The courthouse doors shut behind us with a soft thud, not closing the past, but sealing it where it belonged inside records and files and verdict sheets, while my future stretched forward like open highway, terrifying and bright, and mine. Healing did not arrive in one grand moment or with a single deep breath on a courthouse stairway, but in tiny, stubborn ripples, the kind that barely register at first, like sunlight creeping across a dark room in inches instead of beams. After sentencing day, I spent my first night in an unfamiliar bed at Mrs. Jennings's home, a spare room that smelled like lavender and laundry soap instead of stale anger and cheap bourbon. And I lay awake staring at the ceiling because silence felt louder than any slammed door I had grown up bracing for, and freedom did not feel like fireworks, but like a quiet I had to learn how to trust. The first morning I woke and heard only birds outside, and the clink of a spoon stirring coffee downstairs. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with confusion, because for so long peace had seemed like a lie. Adults told children. And when I sat at her kitchen table and she pushed a mug toward me without flinching or correcting or demanding obedience, I felt my throat tighten with something I later recognized as grief for every breakfast I ate, waiting for footsteps and fists. I began to attend trauma therapy twice a week, where Dr. Hayes, a calm woman with silver hair and gentle but unsparing eyes, taught me how to sit with memories without drowning in them, how to breathe through a flashback instead of freezing in one. How to say words like I was hurt and I deserved safety without hearing Frank's voice in my head mocking weakness. And the first time I said survivor out loud instead of victim, my voice shook so hard my arms trembled, but she nodded like I had just lifted something impossible. There were setbacks too, the day a man raised his voice at a grocery store cashier and my legs locked. my throat tightening like hands were around it again, or the night I dropped a glass by accident and the shatter made me curl instinctively toward the floor before I caught myself and reminded my body it no longer had to fold into fear like a prayer. Mrs. Jennings never hovered, never smothered, but she was there when panic rushed me like salt water offering a glass of water or a warm blanket or simply presence. And one afternoon, she handed me a small wooden box, saying quietly that she once received it when she finished her service, and now she wanted me to have it. Not because I fought in a war, but because I survived one in my own home, and I cried in a way I had not let myself cry since childhood. Not the silent tears of hiding, but heaving, shaking sobs that felt like the body emptying poison. My mother began her therapy too, and though I did not move back with her, we met weekly at a small diner, sometimes talking about ordinary things like weather and work, sometimes about the years we lost inside fear. And the first time, she looked me in the eyes and said, "You were right to leave. I should have protected you." I felt something inside me unclench, but did not rush forgiveness. Healing is not forgetting. It is learning how to remember without bleeding. I enrolled in community college, first easing myself into academic life, and Daniel helped me fill out financial forms and walked me to the bookstore on my first day, not hovering, not leading, just walking beside me like someone who believed I could build a life without asking permission. We grew close slowly like flowers learning where the sun is grounding in friendship and quiet confidence, and one evening by the river, he brushed a stray hair behind my ear and said softly, "You are not defined by what he did. You are defined by what you did to rise." And I believed him a little more each time he said something like that. I began jogging in the mornings, feeling my lungs grow stronger. My legs carry me farther, as if reclaiming strength in my body helped rebuild strength in my mind. And on my 19th birthday, I bought myself a silver chain and hung my father's old mining ring on it, letting it rest over my heartbeat as a reminder that love existed in my life long before violence tried to convince me otherwise. Eventually, I moved into a tiny apartment near campus, secondhand furniture, and thrifted curtains, and the first night I slept there alone, I left the lamp on and pressed my palm to the wall, feeling its stillness, whispering gently, "You are safe," like a lullaby to a part of me still learning the truth. I started writing too, not just journaling, but essays and blog entries about survival resilience, signs of coercive control, how silence protects abusers, how documentation saves lives. People commented, some saying they saw pieces of their past in my words. One woman saying she printed my posts and kept them in her purse as courage for when she was ready to leave, and the idea that my survival could spark someone else's felt like victory without bitterness. Healing did not erase the scars or silence the echoes, but it taught me the difference between flinching and feeling, between memory and danger, between living and surviving. And the day I attended my first nursing lecture textbook heavy in my arms, Scrub's crisp hair braided neatly, I looked around the classroom full of strangers and whispered to myself, "You did not escape to hide, you escaped to live." My voice did not tremble. Healing does not end with safety, it evolves into purpose. And months after the sentencing, I found myself standing in front of my small desk laptop, open cursor blinking. Not with fear this time, but with intent, because surviving meant breathing again. But healing meant speaking, and I refused to let my story sit in the shadows where men like Frank thrive. I launched a blog called Silent No More, Not Polished or Fancy, Just Honest Raw. A place where I poured truth into paragraphs instead of hiding it behind silence. Writing about coercive control, warning signs dismissed as discipline bruises invisible to the eye, but loud in the soul. And slowly comments began to appear from strangers in Florida, veterans in Ohio, mothers in Texas, college students in Michigan, each one whispering echoes of a life they survived, or a life they were still trapped in. And their words reminded me that my pain was not an island, but part of a whole coastline of hidden battles. People wrote things like, "I thought it was just me," and reading this gave me courage to call a hotline, and I never named it abuse until now, and each message felt like proof that breaking silence was not shameful, it was revolutionary. I started posting short videos too, voice shaking at first, then steadier, explaining how abusers twist loyalty into chains. How leaving is not weakness, but warfare, won silently. How neighbors like Mrs. Jennings are sometimes the difference between living and dying, and comments poured in from widowed veterans, retired teachers, truck drivers, grandmothers, churchwomen. Veterans who once believed discipline meant control until they saw their children flinch. And suddenly, I was not just healing but helping build a place where others could breathe too. One evening, I filmed a video outside the courthouse steps where I once collapsed into the sun, telling anyone watching that survival is not a story of strength alone, but of witnesses too, that if they ever see bruises on a child or hear muffled sobs through thin walls, they do not need to understand the whole story to care. They only need to act, and that simple truth caught fire online, strangers sharing it. Neighbors tagging each other, one retired sheriff messaging that he printed it to hand out at community meetings. And so, I ended every video and every post with the same reminder. Do not wait for someone to be brave enough to scream. Sometimes they are too busy trying to breathe. Now, when I walk across campus wearing my Scrubs books in hand, hair tied back, future within reach, people smile at me. Not because they know my story, but because they see a girl owning her life rather than surviving her past, and every step feels like a promise to the version of me who once curled under blankets praying to wake up somewhere else. There are nights I still hear echoes. Memories flicker like moth wings against glass, but they no longer trap me. They guide me. And when I open my laptop to respond to one more message from someone whispering that they are scared, ashamed, or uncertain, I tell them the truth. I learned barefoot under hospital lights and again in front of a jury. Silence feeds monsters, but your voice starves them. If you are reading this or hearing this right now, and something inside you recognized pain you never named, know this. Your life is not a cage, and your breath is not his to control. Share this story not for me, but for the neighbor who keeps her windows closed too tight, for the teenager whose laughter vanished this year, for the woman at church who flinches when someone reaches too fast, for the quiet souls who think they are alone in the dark. Comment where you are listening from so others see the world watching. Subscribe if you believe no voice should stay buried, and share this so someone scrolling in silence tonight sees proof they are not broken, they are surviving, and surviving is the first step toward freedom. Together, we do not just witness, we refuse to look away.